Bam.
This is Rob Greenlee, and this is the Break It Down show.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate you coming back on the show. The last time I was hustling. I was on the move. One of the things I like to do with the show is to be mobile with it. And so I was at a golf event, charity event, and I sat down at a Starbucks, and you and I had a conversation. And I was just getting blasted by the sun and, worried about the traffic noise because we're on a pretty major boulevard right there. But It is amazing. Anything as long as you're willing to do the work, anything you can dream up, you can do. I literally put my kit, 3 cameras, and I put it on my back. And maybe I have a couple of backup things in the truck or whatever, but I'll drive almost anywhere within reason. And my reason is pretty wacky. But you can do that. You can do what we're doing now and do it via the web. It is amazing how mature and still yet brilliant and wide open I think the podcast world is. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think the ways that you can produce content now are so varied and of high quality now that, one of the challenges that all content creators have now is, well, what's the right tool for what I want to do? That's the big question that everybody is grappling with right now, because there's always new tech coming out, new handheld cameras, new switchers, like this new Rode that came out, this Rodecaster video is really kind of a transformative, kind of a tool for content creators. It's very portable, but yet it's very professional grade. And I've got a Rodecaster here myself for the audio, and increasingly doing more stuff with the video side. So having a tool like that is something that I'm considering adding to my toolkit, but it is a little expensive. It's like $1,200 or $1,300. So it's not it's not as easy as a $500 investment in a Rodecaster. So yeah.
Boy. Yeah, pro grade for what we do has really become significant. I've got a $2,000 camera, one of my cameras, and I'll slowly go to. I don't mind buying somebody else's dream that failed and get their used camera, but you have to have good stuff, and that's the camera. Then you got to have the lens. Then you got to have and all of a sudden you're into a lot of money.
Yeah, you can. I mean, especially if you're doing video, I think it's pretty inexpensive now to do good quality audio. But if you want to get involved in video, that's a whole nother level of skills and practice and risk to some degree, because how do you know the camera that you're going to get is really going to be what you need? And to some degree, we've been through that a little bit with podcasting with microphones for many years. As you can see behind me, I've got lots of microphones on my shelf that I'm not currently using that I've gone through over the years. So there is a certain amount of kind of experimentation that people do, and then they find their sweet spot. But it does take some investment. It does take patience and realizing that you're just trying to make the best choice at the time for what you're trying to do and what your understanding of what you're trying to do is. And it's very complicated, and it's always changing too. Yeah.
So I was reading one of your recent blogs. I think it's the most recent one. Where you talk about the maturity of the market. It for sure is mature. I mean, it's no longer radio stations saying there's no podcast. They just take their stuff and repurpose it into podcast form. Right. So you're competing with ESPN, Jason Bateman. I mean, anybody, right? And the competition for attention it's as high as it's ever been. It is, but there's more people. But man, oh man, it is hard to stand out.
Yeah, it is. But there's never been more consumers of online content than ever before either. So, you got both ends of the spectrum growing and getting more and more. Though I would say on the podcasting side, there has been a little bit of pullback on new creators. It's not as flooded of a market. If you look at the actual active podcasts in the medium versus what is oftentimes put out, there's like these 4 million podcasts out there. You're really only looking at maybe about 300,000 or 400,000 globally that are active podcasts, ones that are being regularly updated with new content. So your pool of competitors is actually a lot less than what people perceive out there is what's going on. And unfortunately, we have seen a shift towards the big shows getting more successful as we've seen more listeners or viewers come into consuming this content, as we've seen mainstream media kind of fall off the bandwagon to some degree and
Yeah.
see this shift of all of this major media talent becoming podcasters of sorts or video creators on like places like YouTube and Rumble and others. That there's a big shift going on right now, and it's a little bit of a generational shift too, but it's also one where it does, like you said, it creates a huge amount of noise, which is, something that I think was coming for many years. Just that it was growing slowly, where now it's like we've reached, I think it's close to 80% of people in the US plus have at some point consumed a podcast. So it's reaching saturation in some ways on that
Yeah.
side.
So whenever I'm advising clients, I'm pretty hard on them. Like, hey, don't do this. You're talking about starting up a business that has no real path to revenue. I can lie to you, but I'm not going to do that, right? And it's a lot. It's just a lot of work, and you're going to have to pay me professional rates. I'm glad to get you off of my books and have you automate and have you hire other people. But to get there, you're still going to have to pay me. And even then, they're still like, "Oh, I think I want to do it." And I'm like, "You could just go spend money on PR." I'm trying to talk them out of it, not because I don't want the client, but I want to be honest with them about the challenge of being one of the shows that makes it to 10, 20, 100, 150 episodes. It's not gentle work. And the reality is a lot of the money you get coming in the door goes right back out the same door, because you've got to get new cameras. I mean, I've got a whole Foot Locker full of old microphones like you do and cables for days, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't want to dissuade anybody's dream, but I don't want a dream. I want someone who is capable and driven. Like, no, this is important to me. This is going to be this wing of my business. Someone who just wants to get something off the chest. I'll talk to them, but I don't even bother like getting too deep down the road because they'll quit before they start. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it is appropriate now to set expectations to some degree, and I think that's one of the challenges that the podcasting industry has had, if you want to call it an industry. It's really kind of a medium that has an industry has been built around it, was this expectation that, all you have to do is create something and you're going to find an audience and you're going to find, monetary success. And that unfortunately is not always the case. There's so many variables that go into it. And I mean, you're in the content business, so there's risks, there's challenges, there's alignment with trends and people's interests. And there's a lot of variables. I know platforms like YouTube and increasingly Spotify are trying to quantify that, right? And they're trying to get more data about what people are looking for and how long they're watching and what kind of content's resonant. I mean, they're trying to drive a data-driven content environment, which really hasn't existed before. If you think about television, you think about musicians, or you think about, movie makers and things like that, they really haven't been data-driven. They've been kind of gut-driven. But those have also been times when there was scarcity of content too. So you didn't have a lot of choice. And there was a lot of focus on just a small amount of content being produced. And so there was a lot of pressure on producing quality and producing, investing a lot of money into these things to make them successful. But as we moved into this new era of digital content creation, it's just open the floodgates to new content, new ways of looking at it. And all of us, most people today are really kind of streamers and broadcasters or social media folks as part of their daily function of their lives now. It's not like the old days where there was like 3 or 4, networks and a couple of radio stations, and that was it, right? Now it's like we're all like that now. I mean, it's
true.
And it just creates this kind of an opportunity, but yet challenge.
There's always opportunities in these things, right? Like, this is like, I have an opportunity to talk to Rob. Rob's a Hall of Fame podcaster. He's the dang chairman of the Hall of Fame for podcasting. And yet, you're right. We have these opportunities to do these things. And I don't even push my show out on podcast channels because one of the things, looking at my business, I can pay someone to do that. I can do it myself, or I could not do it at all and use that resource to do something else. So I don't push out to Libsyn And I'll say this, I'll be honest, I'll be a little bit critical of Libsyn. It was partly because of Libsyn. Like when I came to them and said, hey, the market's moving this direction, I'd love to talk to you guys and help you with it and help figure it out and be part of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Bunch of slam doors in my face. Glad to take my money, not glad to, listen to me and have them do better. And so I did back off from my relationship with them. And then when I looked for places to cut, it wasn't valuable. So I paid the subscription to keep what's there alive, but I don't know that I'll go back that route because there wasn't enough return. I mean, and look, I've been around for a long time, not as long as you, but I've got over 10 years and over 2,000 episodes. And so if something doesn't work in a given amount of time, I get to go not valuable and move it to the side, right? So what do everybody's trying to build audience, even the platforms, like you want to start a platform. You're all still gathering audiences at that point too. Like, how do we make something valuable? I struggle with what's valuable for me because I know I want to see a return. Glad to spend money on my show, but Google will send me like, hey, we'll triple your ad buy. And I'm like, they haven't worked in the past, like they give me a fluff, but then I come back and I turned off the ad campaign and my show idles right back where it was. And I'm like, so I don't know. What are your thoughts on that part of the industry where you have legitimate creators who want to invest in their business, but it's really tough to find real help?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are at a stage right now where we're shifting, right? And there's a shift happening towards kind of back to maybe big creators again, some level of exclusive content. I think we did go through a little bit of an era of that, but I do also wonder if part of what we're going to see happen is, and there's a lot of kind of converging trends that are driving this, but where content's going to go behind private connections. And when I say private connections, maybe like private communities. Because one of the challenges that a lot of content creators have had over the last couple of years is that if they want to produce kind of cutting edge content or controversial content, that they have to be concerned about investing lots of time in producing something and then have the platform say, sorry, it doesn't comply with our community standards, right? So there's a disincentive for people to keep producing to these big platforms. And I think maybe those pressures, I hate to say, but around forms of censorship and control of external messaging as these digital platforms really start to change the world, that people are going to want to take it behind private relationships with their audience. And that takes them out of the public realm and puts them into a more private type of environment, which they may be less targeted for takedowns and restrictions on speech and things like that. It's the kind of the broadcast mentality kind of amplified to an extreme is kind of what's happening right now, is that, the big, the governments and those who are really trying to put their thumb on the scale of what's okay to talk about, what isn't okay to talk about. And I think that's driving trends in the podcasting industry as well as the video industry to platforms that are explicitly not censoring and explicitly not putting the thumb on the scale of what's okay and what's not okay. And I think that's driving a shift in the industry to more private communities.
Yeah, it's a problem I'm dealing with. I have a client named Dr. Hal Bradley, and he used to be a drug smuggler, and then he turned his life around, and he's dealt with all of these people. And I say drug smuggler, I mean like of the first order. He did time. He grew up with El Chapo. I mean, this guy's incredible. And so what he's done when he's turned his life around is he invests in the well-being of people who are badly, horribly broken and abused.
Yeah.
And he's like, I have to tell these stories so people can hear that these people are real, they exist. And when they do screwed up things, you have to understand that like they're screwed up and it takes time and patience. And so we're making these shows, and for right now, no one's really paying attention because, by design, we're just ramping our way up. But I'm not going to be able to run this show on YouTube.
Yeah.
it's gonna be a problem. And he's like, I want to use the Doors music. And I'm like, I can't use that. And he's like, why not? And I'm like, let me just tell you, man, that doesn't work. And so trying to figure out where to even house this thing pre-audience. Like again,
Right.
we're live, we're putting out shows, but I don't know, where do you host something that has so much violence and so much sexual abuse it's not celebrated, but it is highlighted? And then you talk about the recovery process, and the show is beautiful in that because it is so talking about tragedies, but the redemption and is the big part of it. But that doesn't sit well with, and I'm not blaming YouTube, right? They've got a job to do. Where do you put a show like that needs to be out there?
Well, I think one of the strengths of podcasting, and it's always been open RSS. It's been one of those things that has been lauded, and one of the reasons that this medium even exists is
Right.
because of the fact that we were breaking the chains of hold by mainstream media and the control that was, enabled by these limited channels and things like that. And then just the open nature of RSS has really enabled the ability to distribute shows out there, and then off your own website, things like that
Right.
kind of break those big proprietary platforms walls down, because there are no gatekeepers to your content. So there is, that element too, though it is more challenging to market a show that's only available on RSS and maybe not even in Apple, right? Or
Right.
Spotify or any of these big platforms. And it just operates on its own through maybe some third-party smaller apps that are out there. And that's why we're seeing a little bit of this move towards trying to build private communities,
Yeah.
and of people that have a common interest in wanting to talk to each other. I mean, I've seen some very, very controversial shows that are streaming and doing content off of RSS, and like maybe making their shows available off like a Rumble platform,
Right.
and not even involved in Spotify and YouTube, who have a reputation for, having these community standards that that content creators have a risk for, or creating some of their content on YouTube and then creating other content on these other platforms like a Rumble and other ones. And I think there's going to be others that are going to pop up here. Yeah.
It is a challenge too, because again, when I'm trying to advise people, I say, hey, pick a platform that you want to grow on. Don't try to grow on 10 at the same time. Publish, but don't, because otherwise you spend your entire time trying to, fiddle around on the damn internet. But if you build it on YouTube, and I'm going to be hard on YouTube now. I cannot talk to the person in charge of helping people like me. Won't return a call, right? Same thing with X. They won't return a phone call. And so you're like, hey, I have a business thing I'm trying to run, but I need to know if you're an actual partner in my business or not. X would love me to spend ad money on my show.
Right.
And I talked to him, and I'm like, here are the 3 things you must address that are broken right now, not about my show, but about my peers. Yeah. And I need to know, I can call someone and be like, hey, you just turned the power off at my business, or whatever it's going to be, because they're awful at this, And so you think about that, it does seem that there is, like, Rumble is probably a good example, but then there is the political poison of Rumble, where it's like, oh, well, that's only X and X and X kind of people. And you're like, I don't want to just be available to that. So there's always these compromises. It's very difficult to give solid advice. Oh, and by the way, poof, there goes a entire platform. It just runs out of business, and we've seen that also. How do you advise people on where to build an audience? Because it's hard. It's almost impossible to build an audience. And then you have to be allowed to build an audience, because like YouTube's like, we don't like what you do. Not because it's bad, but because we're promoting this over here,
Yeah, I think it's increasingly being driven by what the content is. And I think we're moving into that kind of era of the content needs to match the audience and the platform increasingly, and who is the audience of the platform. And that's where this conversation about a Rumble comes into play, is that is the antithetical platform to YouTube, right? It's like the reaction to the behavior of a big tech kind of platform, right? Is that there's always an equal and opposite reaction. If a section of the community sees what's going on one side as being perceived as wrong, well, let's let's be a rebel. I mean, that's kind of where podcasting kind of fits in. Podcasting was a result of the dissatisfaction of people with broadcast radio, right? So, and what we're seeing happen right now is a lot of the broadcast radio folks are getting into podcasting, and it's creating a certain amount of tension around the older generation. I probably include myself. I mean, I started on the radio before I started podcasting. And so I can clearly see that tension between those two models. And I gravitate towards the podcasting side, which is a little bit of a reaction, kind of like what's going on with YouTube, right? And certain content creators saying, I don't agree with that, so I'm going to go over and be on Rumble. And that's equivalent to doing, becoming a podcast, right? So it's breaking the mold. Now, granted, everybody has kind of like the same interests, right? It's just, how can they continue doing what they're doing is really at the end of the day, right? Both platforms support monetization. YouTube supports monetization, and increasingly so does a platform like a Rumble. And we're seeing Spotify get involved in monetization too, because that's what content creators are looking for now. They want to create a full-time career being a content creator. And it's always been hard. I mean, even if I think back to the early days of podcasting, everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, a certain percentage of content creators were interested in monetizing through advertising, right?
Right.
A larger percentage wanted to monetize through some sort of, like maybe host reads or brand relationships or some level of sponsorship, not so much advertising, but so those kind of environments still exist today. So it's really, I think we've shifted back towards more authentic host read kind of brand endorsements. The influencer concept, right, is definitely come back stronger since a lot of the advertising, the traditional type of advertising in podcasts has kind of pulled back. The budgets aren't as big. These big content deals with big major networks around guarantees and things like that has definitely fallen off of the wagon. The average CPM continues to drop. I think we're down around $20 or $18 to $20 now CPM on that's a per thousand download or per thousand audience payment for an ad spot, like maybe a 30-second or 60-second ad spot in your content. That can also be a host read too. And increasingly these agencies are paying more for host read endorsements, right? And that's always been the case since the very early days of podcasting. It was always the relationship that the host had with its audience. And that always drove more trust and more value to the sponsor than a pre-recorded radio ad that was played in your podcast, right? It just doesn't have the same relationship with the audience. And so that's kind of that's the tension that podcasting is going through right now, is the radio industry moves into podcasting increasingly and wants to bring their ideology, which is more pre-produced ads that get injected into podcasts. And so we've seen this shift that's moved into podcasting because the radio industry feels threatened by podcasting. So, it's like join it or get destroyed by it, I think is the message. Yeah. So that's
meanwhile, we're all fast forwarding through the ad that's pre-produced.
Well, that's always that's pretty much always been possible. And oftentimes the actual host of the show will say, I had to load up 4 spots at the beginning of the show, just hit the fast forward button for the first 2 minutes, So he's been, it's this tension between wanting to create a better experience for the audience, but yet wanting to make money with it. And sometimes they conflict with each other.
As you look to put your platform together and launch this thing and get it out, as you call it, a door, I'm wondering what you're thinking about, because one of the things that frustrates me about YouTube and X, and I'm just using these guys as examples, Spotify, for example, if they focused on breaking acts, they would have, I think, a lot more success with people. But if it's just, publish it and they will come, well, maybe, probably not. And then if you're going to derank me, like I can go into I can go out and I can do all the things I'm supposed to do on YouTube. I can put a little short up and spend my time and effort doing that. And it just goes bananas all the way up to 3,000 flat line. And I'm like, well, see, you just killed my video and it was going up like a rocket, So don't do that.
Right.
Let it find its peak on its own and then come down, and they don't do that though. So it's like they're desperate to do the things that don't allow good shows to. Look, my show's fine. My audience is just, I'm not talking about me. I'm just talking about someone who's trying to get out there and they're really doing it. And you give them all the signs for like, hey, we're a bad business partner. We're a bad business partner. We spend money with us. So how do you defeat that within what you design so that you can have something that show producers like, yeah, this is a place to, like I tell everybody, don't go to Patreon because they might deplatform you. They'll for sure put a higher ranking show up in front of your stuff as often as possible. They will not help you, right? And they will take a big cut of what you do. So just build it yourself. That's my typical advice. But how do you avoid these pitfalls that are so obvious to me on the production side?
Yeah, it's a power imbalance that's going on. A lot of these big platforms have so many creators and so many people that want something from them, and it just transfers a bunch of power to them, and they can manipulate things and make things better for them, right? And not so much in this balance between what's good for the content creators on the platform. And this is the tension that has been with YouTube and Google just in general for many years. I mean, even around the AdSense program that they had, where I used to run ads from Google on my website and things like that. And then over a period of time, they would just cut back the amount of commissions they would pay on doing that. So it's these big platforms have just kind of like are constantly siphoning the lifeblood out of content creators. And I do think that we've kind of a little bit hit a wall here over the last couple of years where there's just only so much blood to squeeze from the turnip, right? I mean,
right. Yeah.
And at some point, the creators kind of like say it's not worth it to do it anymore. So, and this conversation has even come up on my other podcast, my new media show, where maybe all the content creators need to band together and form a union of sorts, just like what happened with the longshoremen, to say, sorry, you can't have my content unless you pay me a guarantee of per view amount, and because a lot of these platforms will take advantage of people. And so where's the counterbalance on this?
You can't even get a meeting. You're telling me you're a good business partner and I can't get a meeting with you? Oh, come on.
Well, if you think about that, gets back to the question of scale, right? I mean, if you've got 10 million content creators on your platform, but only 1,000 employees, that's kind of hard to scale in a real practical way. And that's the core of the tension is that a lot of those people that work on those big platforms, they explicitly don't make themselves accessible, right? Because they either know, one, they don't want to be accessible because that takes time out of their lives, or they have been told not to be because they're trying to protect the reputation of the platform to some degree, right?
Oh man! And then you sit in on one of their little webinars and everything, and you're just like, oh, there that person is, and it's almost insulting,
it is. I mean, I used to work for Microsoft and Xbox for 7 years. I ran the Zune podcast platform in the early days for Microsoft. I launched that. That platform shut down in 2014. So, I had it was built to compete with the iPod in the early days, the Zune portable media player.
I remember those.
Yeah. And so that was kind of my experience with working with one of these big tech companies. I was there for 7 years, and for a period of time, the Zune was the second largest podcast consumption platform behind Apple. And so working for these big platforms is that they have a priority that's not always aligned with the creators. And I had to just kind of throw myself out there. I mean, if I was probably, and this would be a challenge to do now, because back in those days, my catalog of podcasts was only about 30,000. But if you think
Sure.
about how many
Only.
content creators that there are now, you're
Yeah.
talking about millions. And
Right.
so putting myself out there as a direct contact representation of a platform is a scary thing for a lot of people to think about doing. I mean, I did it back in that day. I was out doing podcasts just like I'm doing right now, talking about, a platform that's on Microsoft, right? This huge company, and had millions of users of Zunes. And so I've actually been on that side and been in that place. And I was willing to take that risk. And it really
Yeah.
did build a really strong kind of community connection for me and the podcasters back at that time, because I was the only one doing it. I mean, Apple was
Yeah.
hiding and wasn't really talking. I mean, I had contact with people at Apple, but most people in the podcasting space didn't, right? So
Yeah.
that's the problem with a lot of these big tech platforms, is that they don't make people accessible to the community, which builds ill will to some degree. And this is, I think a really good example of what goes on with this is really exemplified by what's recently happened with StreamYard,
Yeah.
which is the platform that we're doing this on. Is that the two founders of the company were very publicly accessible, did a show every week, and was open to feedback, and was open to the community, and was accessible, and it built such a solid community around that. And that's also another clue about where the opportunity in the future is that if you can build a platform that has direct contact with the leaders of it, and the founders or the creators or the people that work on the platform are publicly accessible, that goes a long way to building trust.
Yeah. I use the site begrudgingly, because I do struggle to get a hold of these guys, but it serves the need that I have. And so
Sure.
I was like, well, this is better than having to look around for something else. So if I am to move, I'm always movable, but and then I have a lot of questions, because it's my business, right? Like it's how I survive. And
yeah.
Anyhow, but let's talk about Adore though. I want to know what you're building and why. Look, obviously you're going to know how to build it so that it makes sense, but not just follow the lead. You're going to be a leader, I would imagine.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's kind of an interesting story, because I originally started the Adore network when I was working for Spreaker, which is now owned by iHeart, and so they actually had the whole brand of it and everything. So, and I got it back from them over this last year, because they were working on a different kind of brand network called the Prime Network brand. And so I got it back from them, and I had built a network on there back in 2015, 2016 timeframe. So it's really a matter of getting it rebuilt again, and adding some cool new shows, and just trying to help creators. And at the end of the day, that's really what I'm trying to build is
Right.
that private community where I can help some shows, not every show,
Sure.
to shepherd that process along for them, and also give them a powerful tool to monetize and to host their show. And that can be part of that relationship that I have. And it's not unusual. I mean, this same concept is being done by the Evergreen Podcast Network and others out there too, where they're working with large numbers of shows to help them achieve success. And I do think that increasingly podcasters need kind of, coaching help, and need kind of consultation, someone that they can talk to, that they can trust.
Yeah.
And so that's the direction that I'm going with the Adore network, in partnership with Spreaker. So
That's neat, man. I like it. We need folks that know. So, again, I'm always investing in my show and looking for different ways to do these things. And it doesn't matter what company it was, but they're like, hey, we have coaches. And I'm like, all right. I mean, I'd be interested to see what somebody who has 5% of my experience, what they're going to coach me on. But I'm not so impossibly huge that I can't just say, here's $100 a month or whatever that number is going to be.
Yeah.
And I could not get that person caught up to where I was at. They have a lot of, it's just so much,
well, it's a lot to it, right?
Yeah. And I hate to say it's banal, but like you have to have depth of knowledge. And the market, like you have forever days and days of depth of knowledge and experience, and you know the cycle and how it spins back around. That is helpful, right? To have something like that, but have someone to say, well, your thumbnails aren't good enough. Well, first off, I'm not gonna do that. That's ridiculous. I'm not doing that. And if my thumbnail is the problem of my show, okay, great. But you have to put your money where your mouth is. And I'll put exactly the kind of thumbnail you think I need to have. And if it doesn't work, you owe me money. And of course, no one wants that bet.
Well, so, that's,
that
message you just said really cuts to the core of what the real issue is of this. And that is, being a content creator is a creative process. It's like, trying to say, well, I want to be an artist and I want to guarantee success. It's like, no, there is no guarantee of success.
That's right.
It's a very touchy-feely thing. It's not, there's a lot of variables that go into it. And it's hard to say, if I start working with someone, that they will assuredly find the exact success that they started down the path for. And it may take longer than they think it will, or it may never happen. I mean, that's the real tension that's going on here. And there's just so many variables that go into it, but you can help people kind of like get through some of those particular aspects, but can't do it for them really.
No, and you've got to be willing to do a lot of work and a lot of failure to get anywhere. And one of the things that I've realized,
test, right?
Yeah, absolutely. My show may take off like a rocket again one day and become a huge show. It's fine, where it is. And what I realized a long time ago is I really don't control who gets to listen to it, because I don't control the gates and everything downstream from me. I can make it could be good, but at some point, I have to find value where the value is. And the value in my show is in relationships like with you or anybody else I get to meet and know. And it turns out, and I never would have guessed this, it looks like I'm going to become, at least in some measure, a documentary filmmaker because of my show. Because I can, and here's the gap that I realized I can fill. People who have incredible books and stories but they don't have access to Hollywood people who actually do things. They can go on a tour and get, wooed and everything, but nothing comes of that because they're not it. And so I can take them specifically across the bridge and go, I have this story. Is this interesting to you? And I can one at a time that. And when I find a person's like, yes, I can sell that story. Let's make that movie. There's 100 other problems, but that's what my show has built for me. I never would have picked that, never would have known that. But here I am. And I'm not even that good at gapping that bridge, but I am doing it. Like there's interest. Sometimes that interest dies, but that's how these projects go. And so if you would have told me that was going to be what happened, I wouldn't have believed you, because it's impossible and it's crazy.
Right.
And yet it's happening. But the other thing is if I would have come in with the design, like a firm design, like I will do 10 episodes, per the plan, and put them out and publish it. And if I step by stepped it also wouldn't have happened, because sometimes we don't know what our show is going to give us. It has all these rewards, but we have to be comfortable with the miscomfort of not knowing where the reward is until you see it and realize it. And it might take a long time.
Yeah. And I think it really gets back to vision and creating synergies too. And I think that's the part that I even struggle with too, is just, those two concepts are not easy to do. Creating synergies with your media and your life and your business and everything is very difficult. And I think that is really the formula to success, is to synergize the things that you're doing so they complement each other and they work together with each other, especially as you think about individual personal brand and how you put yourself out there. What kind of media are you creating? What's your professional business? What's your expertise? What have you accomplished in life? Those are all variables too that attract people to you. And it does center around expertise, and it does center around real world successful experience. And that is so key to making all this work.
Here's the door I want to open: expertise versus influence. Those things show up at different times,
Yeah, it's not a perfect path. No.
Yeah. People get influence before they have expertise, and you can see it. You're like, oh boy, you are well known, but you
Well,
don't
if you
know
get
well.
if you get enough influence, the expertise will probably come from that, right? But it won't
Yeah.
be probably the expertise that you expected to have maybe going into it. So
Yeah. Well, this is old man heady wise talk, right? Like it's just
yeah,
like you want this attention, and I don't even necessarily care about it. Sure, like it's nice to be paid attention to, but I don't. I like my life the way it is in terms of the attention that I get paid, and I wouldn't want to sacrifice that, especially for negative things. Oh my gosh, you
yeah.
have to worry about whatever words you say, but when you're younger, boy, you want that attention. You want all of it, and it just doesn't. It doesn't necessarily pay the bills the way you want it to.
Yeah, it is an interesting question around, if you're I think in the earlier days of podcasting, I think it was really about wanting attention. Now
I think that's fair.
I, I think it's a little different now. I think it's not so much about attention as much as it is around personal brand. It's more about, do you really exist in the world now if you don't create online media of some level?
Mm,
It's an existential thing now. I mean,
yeah.
it's like these are things that are like core competencies and core skills to survive in the world today. And I do see people kind of moving away from it, and I do kind of wonder about that, right? There is this movement to kind of pull back from technology and to pull back and get more like how we used to live many decades ago without technology, because we see technology is a little bit of a threat. And there's a fear driving this change that's happening too.
Yeah.
And it does kind of make me wonder if the folks that head down that path, what their future looks like from the standpoint of being able to participate in the very, very extremely high-tech world that we are in and we're increasingly moving into. That
Yeah.
they will have a divide here that causes problems.
There's some kind of Confucian saying that we can invent here, and it's like if you are contented, you will not be content, but you can become contented if you
Don't have
well or
content.
something. Yeah, maybe don't, but yeah, using that play on the word of content and content, it's interesting because
I mean, if you kind of unplug and you move out to the rural environments or out into nature and you get a log cabin out there and you just don't care about what goes on in the digital realm. There's probably something to be said for that, right?
Yeah.
And that may be where we're coming into, is that if we get too digitized and we get too in the weeds of technology and AI and all stuff like that, it's gonna repel a certain percentage of the population, and they're gonna head for the hills, quite literally.
Yeah, and I think I always try to bring the humanity into what I do. Like, if possible, I want to sit across from you and put my show up studio on my back and go see you. I want to be out.
That's another big trend that's happening right now too, is the in-person podcast.
Yeah,
that's been building
just
for
not that
years
hard to
now.
do.
Right.
Yeah, right. And the ability to say, well, I'll just come. Here's the thing that's amazing about this, and you probably know this, but this will be for the audience. I live pretty close to Hollywood, right? So it's just a quick drive up the road. Mm-hmm. If I go to, I don't know, but pick a star, Chris Pratt's house.
Okay.
And he's going to promote his movie, and his agent's like, or his PR person's like, yeah, come on over. It'd be great to have him face to face. He'd love that. You're an Army guy. He loves that. Okay, great. I sit down. The second I'm in their house, I'm their guest. Mm-hmm. And the next time someone says, I made cookies just for you, Pete, it won't be the first time. And so you sit down and someone's now opened their home to you, and they want to make sure that you're satisfied and they have everything you need to do the thing for them. And it's mind-blowing how different those conversations are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, it's been a while since I've done an in-person interview or in-person kind of recording in video. And I'm seeing very successful content creators now creating whole shows around building like a set, and then they have a multi-camera kind of setup, and they switch the camera views. I mean, a platform like a StreamYard can do some of the same kind of functional things, but it's really, quite different to be face to face with someone. And that's kind of where I started. I mean, I started doing the content that I was doing in the early days. This is back in 1999 in a radio station, and I had co-hosts. I had 3 other co-hosts at the time. And so it was a little bit like, one of those morning talk shows or something like that. But having people all together creates a different kind of dynamic. Now, granted, I can see you and we can probably have a very similar conversation to what we would be in person, but there may be that X element there that is different. And it's also what the audience experiences too, right? If the audience sees us together, maybe they feel a bigger connection between us in their experience, almost like a fly in the wall type of thing, where this is kind of like 2 remote cameras that are, I'm on the East Coast and you're on the West Coast. It's still got a removed element to it.
Yep. Well, just like when you're sitting across from someone at a table, I'm going to look in your eye. By training, I'm also going to look in one eye and I'm going to pay attention to you and you're going to see that. And even if I say ahead of time, I have to do some show controls. If you see me doing this, I'm listening, but I have to, because they understand I'm flying an airplane, one-man banding it. But like this, I can get distracted by anything, and there's no responsibility for me to look into that camera, Right. And so it makes such a huge difference. I can't even communicate to people like the interpersonal communication, shoulders, feet, hands, all these things that I pay attention to, even if it's passively, and then all of a sudden I see your hands go up and I'm like, oh, wait, hold on, what's that? And it draws my attention. All of that goes into what we're talking about, and that humanity. By the way, when we finish this, and this, I'm not giving instructions to Rob might just blink away before, like, once the credits roll, right? And that would be it. We wouldn't have any more of a conversation. But if you're in their house, they want to make sure everything's good. They want to take care of you, and you have a mini relationship. Now, look, maybe I would never go back to Chris Pratt's house, but you have the opportunity, and you also, by the way, are top of mind. And you're like, what? Some guy came to my house the other day. What was that guy's name? Let me look. His name's Pete. Have Pete come to you, and all of a sudden, you just got a business lead because you went and sat in front of Chris Pratt, and you blew him away with what you could do. Because when you set up these cameras around people, they're like, "What just happened?"
Right?
They can't believe it.
Yeah, and if you talk about topics and issues that people are thinking about or are currently, debating in their mind, or they see things that they want to find answers to, and I think that's what's driving a lot of the popular content right now. Is, I hate to say, but controversies or politics is a big topic right now that everybody's talking about, and the differences between, the candidates and.
Sure.
And what they last said or what they did wrong, or those are always fodder. And then what's happening with the economy and what's happening at our at the border, or it just, all these issues are issues that people are thinking about, right? And so if you create content that aligns with what people are thinking about or concerned about or have worries about, that they can get more clarity or understanding, I believe that's the kind of content that's really resonating right now, is ones that are helping people cope and deal with and have better understanding of their world.
Yeah, the other day I had, and I'm not trying to get political, but I had on the guy who ended up being the sergeant major for Tim Walz's battalion. I had him come on to talk about, because I'm an Army guy, and I'm like, look, you guys are worried about timelines and should he retire or not, but there's a responsibility when you're in that world. And so I had him come on, and he's pretty contrary to Tim in general. And then, excuse me, I also had on a guy who's called the SEAC, the senior enlisted guy in the Army. Mm-hmm. And he's the senior enlisted guy actually in all of the military, and to talk about the standard of becoming a sergeant major and what those choices mean and how they would counsel one another or someone like Tim. And it's a different conversation. So it's not blaming or anything. That's like, here's what's expected. Here's what happened. Here's why these things don't align, and why you all should know about that, right? And so just that conversation, but these things happen all the time, where someone will say, hey, Pete, I know so-and-so who's an expert on this. Would you have him on the show? And whether it's timely or just interesting, I always try to say yes, because that person often doesn't have a platform to speak from because they're too busy being an expert.
Yeah. And I think when you have in the world a lot of uncertainty and a lot of confusion and kind of like a very divided type of environment, that creates a climate where people are trying to find answers, or they're searching, or they get caught up in just I don't know if the right word is the kind of emotional negativity or euphoria of whatever it is. I think media is driven by that now at a scale that we've never really seen before. And I think a lot of people don't know how to cope with it. I think it drives a lot of uncertainty in people's minds about what they can believe and what they can't believe. And that's why I started a show called Trust Factor, is that I think one of the existential things that all of us are coping with and dealing with is, what are the things can we trust in our world, right? What are things, how much responsibility can I take on my own shoulders without crushing my shoulders? Because it's increasingly evident that we all have to take 100% control of everything in our lives and not be reliant on other people to shoulder anything. And that's from our health to our views and our understanding of the world. And it's, I remember growing up, and I'm sure you're the same way, where the world was pretty calm and everybody got along, and there weren't these divisions between people and different understandings, and people coming out saying, well, this is the truth, but that's pretty evil, right? That if it is true, what does it mean? Right. So those are things that are driving content right now. And I think it's kind of driving some of our political leaders crazy, because they're basically trying to say, well, there's only certain types of content that we're going to allow out there in the world, and it's like, it's because everything is wide open right now.
Yeah. And I spend a lot of my time trying to find that middle ground, where you have two people even disagreeing and having a normal conversation, and things really are often not great, or even greater. They're just unknown or unknowable or separate,
Right.
And you can do that on a podcast, and it's not 7 minutes, it's an hour, or maybe sometimes longer. And so it really is a powerful thing to be able to do it. I want to get into the Hall of Fame, because we haven't talked about that yet. And I'm dying to talk to you about it.
Yeah. So the Hall of Fame is coming up here in January. I believe it's January 17th in Orlando, as part of the Podfest Expo conference at podfestexpo.com. And so this is the second year that we're going to have it at Podfest. It's been around since I think it started in 2018 was the first, no, I think it was 2015 actually was the first year of the Podcast Hall of Fame. So we've got like 38 inductees that are already in the hall right now. If you go to podcasthall.org, I think is the new address, or podcasthof.com still goes to it as well. And you can do a search in Google for Podcast.
I'm doing it
Hall
right
of Fame
now while you're talking.
Right.
Put a link in there for you.
And you can see a lot of the past inductees. I'm one of them. I was inducted in 2017. But this past year, we inducted Adam Carolla, and Dr. Drew Pinsky was our master of ceremonies at the event. And it's also in YouTube too, so you can go watch the whole ceremony. It's like an hour and a half ceremony where we brought in about eight people that have had a significant impact on the growth and development of the podcast medium. Yeah, because I started back in 2004 myself. So
yeah, and so the standard to get into the Hall of Fame is really to put a pretty big dent in the industry and make it bigger or improve in some way, right?
Yeah, it's about impact, it's about influence, it's about it's a little bit of a popularity contest to some degree. That people vote on who's going to be inducted based on success, but this year especially we're going to focus on trying to bring in international nominees as well, because there is, once you get to a certain point, there's people that are involved in podcasting around the world that have had a big impact. So, podcasting did start in North America, mainly in the US and Canada, and to some degree in Australia. But now it's expanded to Asia and Europe. And so we're basically, even the Middle East is starting to get involved, and so is Africa, and South America has been huge for many years. So that's the goal of the organization this year, is to kind of expand its reach and recognition. And sometimes it's hard to know who the big impacts, the drivers or those that had a big impact on podcasting outside of the US, so I'm looking for input from others that have seen the podcast market grow and develop in various countries around the world.
And are you guys going to develop, or do you have already an academy of sorts where you have, I'm just throwing my name in there. I'm not pitching, but just saying like, we have 5,000 guys like Pete who run a show and know the industry and, have respected opinions. And they're all part of the academy,
Yeah, I didn't, there isn't that for the Hall of Fame. I was the former founding chairperson of the Podcast Academy, which runs another podcast type of an awards event. It's called the Ambies. So I was involved in that back when that started, and it's still an active thing. If you go to ambies.com, you can see that as well. But I'm not involved in the board anymore. I served my 3-year term, and now they've got a whole new board over there. It's at thepodcastacademy.com. So, and it's been a very successful kind of award ceremony. I would put it on the level of like the Academy Awards for podcasting. It's kind of at that level. And so the Hall of Fame is kind of looking a little bit more of a retroactive view of the medium and who had the impacts on the earlier years and over the last maybe the last 10 years or so. And where the Ambies is looking at, who's doing the best stuff like this year, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. And gosh, if Adam Carolla just got in, holy cow, you got to be pretty damn good to get into that Hall of Fame. It's a lot of amazing.
Well, yeah, the Hall has Mark Maron is in it as well. And so, Mr. Adam Curry's in it as well. So he's the podfather of podcasting. He's the one that actually started. Actually, my other show, my new media show, just had Adam Curry as a guest. So just this past week. So
wow, that's fun.
We talked about the future of podcasting, and he thought that the local podcasting had a big future as he looked to the future.
Yeah, that's interesting. Local podcasting. There's a lot of everybody's trying to get some attention. And if we have attention to exchange, especially at the small level where you can go shake hands and stuff, there's real value in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, as you see kind of commercial radio kind of collapse to some degree, all these local talk radio stations around the country, I think they're going to have to convert over to a more increasingly digital solution to still maintain their audience, because it is a demographic shift that's going on. If we look at the demographics of a typical broadcast radio listener, they're in their late 60s, early 70s kind of age range. So, that demographic is going to go away, and it's going to be replaced by a new generation coming through. And that new generation is going to be increasingly consuming stuff as podcasts. So that's where the industry needs to shift.
Yeah. And I think that this is just Pete's imagination, but I believe that there's a marketplace for someone, because you can't get the call signs easily, right? But you could create, those great regional radio station audiences still. I think there's people out there that want to hear that, and they can be younger, but just do it in a podcast or some kind of streaming format where you actually have actual DJs that talk and interact, play some music. The music part's a little bit hard because I don't know how you license that, but there's a market there that people I think would fill, because it was just such a wonderful thing back in the old days.
Well, it's interesting to think about music on the radio and what the future of that might look like. We're seeing these big, like Spotify and stuff is really kind of dominating music streaming, and and to some degree, like Pandora and these others that are out there that are doing it as well. And I think as you look at radio today, I still think that music radio stations are pretty much the predominant use of radio right now. And so that will probably stick around a lot longer than the talk radio stations.
Yeah, but it won't be any more human, though. I mean, if you listen and you program out every single song, you will see a certain pattern develop.
Yep. Exactly.
Well,
exactly.
I've had you for an hour, man, and I appreciate it. You've been great. It's always fun to chat with you, and I appreciate your time. I know you're busy running a lot of things, but anything you want to say in closing before we wrap it up?
No, I just appreciate, Pete, the invite to being on your show, and I love talking about podcasting. And if you wanted to follow me, I think you put up there my website, robgreenlee.com, is a great place to keep up with me. And if you wanted to send me an email, just robgreenlee@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have any ideas for the Hall of Fame, if you have somebody that you think would be a great addition to the Podcast Hall of Fame, I'm always looking for names and stories of folks out there that might be a great addition. So,
all right, stand by. I'll be right back to you to say goodbye. Everybody else, I'll see you tomorrow.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by